I built a successful business from nothing. Then my family demanded I bankroll their lives. When I said no, they called me selfish. So I cut them off completely. What happened next was absolutely insane. Sup, Reddit. Never thought I'd be posting here, but my life just imploded in ways I didn't see coming. My family thinks I'm the bad guy for refusing to be their personal bank account, spoiler alert. I'm not. Here's the whole mess, and it's longer than I planned, because there's a lot to unpack. I'm 28 male, a software developer who got lucky with a mobile app 3 years ago. Not Instagram level success, just solid enough that I sold it for high six figures, and now run a small tech consulting firm that pulls in about $180,000 annually after expenses. Nothing crazy, but comfortable enough that I'm not checking my bank account before buying groceries anymore. My family? Different story entirely. Different universe, actually. Dad works retail management at a big box store. One of those places where he's been employed for 20 years, but somehow never quite makes it past assistant manager. Mom's a part-time administrative assistant at a dental office. The kind of job where she works just enough hours to avoid being considered full-time, so the company doesn't have to give her benefits. And my younger brother Kyle, 25 male, bounces between entry-level jobs like he's collecting participation trophies. The kids had maybe 8 different positions in 4 years. Sales associate at a clothing store, warehouse worker at a distribution center, customer service rep for a cable company, delivery driver for 3 different food apps. Each one lasts about 3 to 6 months before something goes wrong, usually something that's mysteriously never his fault. Growing up, money was always tight but never desperate. We weren't poor. We had food on the table and a roof over our heads, but we were definitely lower middle class in a town where everyone else seemed to have nicer stuff. The kind of town where your worth was measured by whether you had the new iPhone or last year's model, whether your car was from this decade or the previous one, whether your house had been renovated recently or still had carpet from the 1980s. Dad worked overtime during holidays, picking up extra shifts at the store during Black Friday and the Christmas season when retail turned into a war zone. Mom clipped coupons like it was an Olympic sport, spending hours at the kitchen table on Sunday afternoons organizing them by expiration date and store. We learned early that asking for expensive things meant listening to lectures about financial responsibility and how money didn't grow on trees and how we needed to appreciate what we had. Kyle and I shared a bedroom until I was 16, an arrangement that felt increasingly ridiculous as we got older, and our interests diverged completely. Bunk beds that creaked every time either of us moved, one closet split down the middle with a piece of tape marking the boundary, constant arguments about whose stuff was whose and who was taking up more than their fair share of space. He'd borrow my things without asking. Video games, clothes, school supplies, electronics, break them or lose them, then act shocked when I got upset. "It's just a game controller, why are you being dramatic?" became his catchphrase for destroying my belongings. "It's just a hoodie, why do you care so much?" when he'd return my clothes with stains or tears. My parents had this weird dynamic where they'd preach about hard work and responsibility in theory, then make excuses every time Kyle screwed something up in practice. When I forgot to take out the trash, I'd get grounded for a week. When Kyle totaled Mom's car joyriding with friends at 2 in the morning, they were just relieved he wasn't hurt, and somehow the insurance covered most of it. Different rules for different kids, and I learned early which category I fell into. The pattern was consistent and maddening. I'd get a B on a test, and Dad would ask why it wasn't an A. Kyle would get a D, and they'd praise him for trying his best and struggling with a difficult subject. I'd ask for $20 for a school trip and get a lecture about budgeting. Kyle would ask for $50 for video games, and they'd hand it over without questions. The double standard was so obvious that even our neighbors noticed, but nobody ever called my parents out on it. When I was 14, I started mowing lawns in the neighborhood to earn money for things I wanted. Saved up for months to buy myself a decent bike since my old one was falling apart. Kyle saw it, decided he wanted one too, and my parents bought him a better bike than mine the following week. When I pointed out that I'd worked for mine and he'd just asked, Mom said I should be proud of being self-sufficient and that Kyle wasn't as naturally motivated as I was. That phrase, self-sufficient, became code for "we're not helping you, figure it out yourself." High school was when the pattern really solidified, and I started seeing it for what it was. Not just favoritism, but a fundamental difference in how they viewed our futures. I worked part-time at a local electronics store starting sophomore year, 20 hours a week on top of school and homework. Saved every dollar in a checking account I'd opened myself, building toward college expenses I knew my parents wouldn't cover. After a year of saving, I bought my own laptop for college applications and schoolwork. A refurbished model that wasn't flashy, but got the job done. Kyle complained that the family desktop was too slow for gaming, and within 2 weeks, my parents bought him a brand new gaming computer with all the bells and whistles cost them probably 3 times what I'd paid for my laptop. When I pointed out the double standard, Dad gave me his standard speech about being more capable and how I should be proud of being self-sufficient. There was that phrase again. Translation: we're going to invest in Kyle's happiness while you fund your own future. And you should feel good about it because it builds character or something. Kyle's computer became his entire world. He'd spend 6 to 8 hours a day gaming while I was at work or doing homework. When his grades dropped to C's and D's, my parents blamed the school system for not engaging him properly. When my straight A's dropped to a couple of B's because I was exhausted from working and studying, I got lectured about not applying myself and losing focus on what mattered. Senior year was particularly brutal. I was working 30 hours a week, maintaining a 3.7 GPA, handling all my own college applications, and trying to figure out financial aid packages. Kyle was failing 2 classes and skipping school regularly. The guidance counselor called my parents about his attendance issues. They made excuses about him being a creative thinker who doesn't thrive in traditional structures. The guidance counselor called about my stress levels and suggested I cut back on work hours. My parents told me not to be dramatic and that hard work never killed anyone. The college application process really highlighted the family dynamic. I spent months researching schools I could afford, calculating costs, applying for every scholarship I could find, wrote my own essays, requested my own recommendation letters, filled out FAFSA forms myself because my parents didn't understand all that paperwork. Kyle barely graduated high school, applied to one community college at the last minute because my parents insisted, and got in because community colleges basically accept everyone. I paid for community college by working full-time night shifts at a warehouse while taking classes during the day. We're talking midnight to 8 a.m. shifts, unloading trucks in a freezing warehouse, then heading straight to 9 a.m. classes without sleep. Lived at home to save money, which meant watching Kyle get spending money from mom and dad while I was grinding 18-hour days between work and school. They'd hand him $40 for gas or movies or whatever, then ask me to chip in for groceries because I was earning good money. Never mind that I was earning that money by not sleeping and destroying my body at a warehouse job. Kyle, meanwhile, coasted through a semester at the same community college before dropping out because the classes were boring and the professors didn't get his learning style. No consequences, no lectures about wasting money or giving up, just sympathy and understanding that college isn't for everyone. When I'd come home exhausted from work at 8 in the morning to sleep for 3 hours before my afternoon class, Kyle would be playing video games in our shared room, volume up, completely oblivious to anyone else's existence. When I asked him to keep it down, he'd tell me I was being uptight and that I should learn to sleep through noise like a normal person. After 2 years of community college and some of the hardest work I'd ever done, I transferred to a state university 3 hours away. Took out loans because I had to, worked 2 part-time jobs because the loans didn't cover everything, and graduated 4 years later with a degree in computer science and about $30,000 in student debt. Moved to the city, got a junior developer position making $45,000 a year, and lived in an apartment with 3 roommates where my bedroom was technically a converted closet, barely big enough for a twin bed and a small desk, no windows. Had to keep the door open for air circulation. Those first few years after college were probably the hardest of my life. Ramen for dinner most nights, not the fancy restaurant ramen, but the 25-cent packages from the grocery store, walking 40 minutes to work to save bus fare. $2 a day adds up when you're barely surviving. Picking up freelance coding projects on weekends to make extra payments on my loans. Sacrificing any social life or free time to try to get ahead financially. Every dollar was accounted for. Every expense calculated down to the cent. I'd buy the cheapest groceries, skip meals sometimes, wear the same 5 outfits in rotation because I couldn't afford new clothes. Meanwhile, Kyle was still living at home rent-free, bouncing between jobs that lasted a few months each. He'd get hired somewhere, work just long enough to feel like the job was beneath him, quit or get fired, then spend a few months figuring out his next move, while my parents covered all his expenses. The pattern repeated over and over, and nobody seemed to find it problematic except me. But I was building something, even if it was invisible to everyone else. Learning new programming frameworks in whatever spare time I could find, taking online courses during my lunch breaks, networking with other developers at meetups and conferences I could barely afford to attend. Started building a mobile app in my spare time, a productivity tool that helped people track habits and set goals. Nothing revolutionary, just solid execution of an idea that people actually wanted and seemed willing to pay for. Worked on that app for 18 months straight. Nights after my day job, entire weekends, every spare moment I could find. My roommates thought I was crazy, spending my 20s staring at code instead of going out to bars or clubs. They'd invite me out and I'd decline because I was either working on the app or too exhausted from working on the app. They stopped inviting me after a while. Maybe they were right to think I was obsessed, but I was betting everything on myself because nobody else was going to. The app launched and did moderately well from day one. Nothing viral, no hockey stick growth curve, just steady organic growth that suggested I'd actually built something people wanted. Good reviews in the app stores, solid user retention numbers, enough traction that bigger companies started noticing. Within 3 months, I had 50,000 active users. Within 6 months, 100,000. The revenue from in-app purchases and subscriptions was covering my loan payments, and then some. After about 8 months, I got an acquisition offer from a mid-sized tech company looking to expand their productivity suite. They saw my user base as a quick way to enter the habits tracking market without building something from scratch. The first offer was $450,000, more money than I'd ever imagined having in my life. I did what any smart person would do. I negotiated, hired a lawyer who specialized in app acquisitions, learned everything I could about the process, and played hardball. We went back and forth for 6 weeks. They wanted me to stay on for a year as a consultant. I wanted full payment upfront with no strings attached. We compromised. 9-month consulting period, $500,000 purchase price, half upfront and half upon completion of the transition. The number was surreal. $500,000 for something I'd built in my spare time over 18 months. After taxes ate about 35% and I paid off my $30,000 in student loans completely, I had about $310,000 left. First time in my life I had real money, and it felt like winning the lottery, except I'd actually worked for it. Didn't tell my family right away. Honestly, didn't even think about it for the first few weeks. I was too busy handling the acquisition process, transitioning users, documenting everything for the new company. Just kept working my day job, kept living in the same apartment with the converted closet bedroom, didn't change anything visible. Nobody needed to know used part of the money to start my consulting firm. Website, business license, some basic equipment. A proper home office setup in a slightly better apartment I'd moved into. Kept the rest invested in index funds, because I'd learned enough about money to know that lottery winners who blow through their winnings end up broke and miserable. Within a year, the consulting business was generating enough steady income that I could quit my day job. That's when life really started to change. No more boss, no more commuting, no more fluorescent lights and cubicles. Just me, my laptop, and clients who were happy to pay $150 an hour for my expertise. That's when I made my first mistake. I told my family about the app sale. Looking back, I can't even remember why I told them. Maybe I wanted acknowledgement. Maybe I wanted them to see that all those years of struggle had been worth something. Maybe I just wanted to feel like their son instead of the kid who'd always been in Kyle's shadow. Whatever the reason, I mentioned it casually during a phone call with Mom about 6 months after the sale had closed. The reaction was interesting. To put it mildly, Dad seemed proud but distant, like he couldn't quite process what I'd accomplished or figure out how to relate to it. He kept asking questions about how apps make money and whether people actually pay for them, like the entire concept was foreign. Mom was excited, but in that way that immediately felt transactional. Lots of "oh wow" and "that's amazing" followed very quickly by mentions of bills they needed help with and repairs the house needed. Kyle asked if I could loan him money for a car since his had just broken down. Not "congratulations," not "that's incredible," just immediately asking what he could get out of it loan. That was the specific word he used. Like there was any universe where I'd see that money again. I was still in that phase where I wanted their approval more than I wanted to protect myself. Still hoping that success would earn me the respect and recognition I'd never gotten for anything else. So I gave Kyle $3,000 for a used car, told him to pay me back whenever he could. No rush, no formal loan agreement, just wanted to help out my little brother. He bought a car for $1,800, a beat-up Honda Civic with nearly 200,000 miles that probably wasn't worth half that, and spent the rest on who knows what new clothes, eating out with friends, video games, probably some other stuff he didn't want to tell me about. Never saw a dollar of repayment, and when I brought it up 6 months later during a family dinner, he acted genuinely offended that I was keeping score with family. Like the concept of paying back money he'd explicitly called a loan was some bizarre foreign custom I'd invented to make him feel bad. That should have been my warning sign, my big red flag that this pattern was only going to get worse. But I was still operating under the delusion that family meant something, that blood relationships came with inherent loyalty and reciprocity. I was wrong, but I wouldn't figure that out for another year and a half. My parents' requests started small and seemed reasonable. Mom mentioned during a phone call that they were behind on the electric bill. Could I help out this month? Just $200. They'd pay me back next week when Dad got paid. I sent the money immediately. Then 2 weeks later, Dad needed new tires for his car. $400. His old ones were completely bald and he was worried about safety. Then a month after that, Mom's car needed repairs. Something with the transmission that the mechanic said couldn't wait. $850. Then, their water heater died in November and had to be replaced immediately unless they wanted to freeze through the winter. $1,200. Each request came with the same energy, the same script. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. We'll pay you back when things settle down. Family helps family in tough times. The promises of repayment got vaguer each time. When things settled down became, when we catch up on bills became, sometime next month probably, became nothing at all. Just the request and the expectation that I'd fulfill it. I kept helping because I could afford it. The consulting business was doing well, and I wasn't spending much on myself. And because I'd been raised with this deeply ingrained belief, that's what you do for family. But things settling down never happened. There was always another emergency, another unexpected expense, another crisis that required my immediate financial intervention. The thing is, some of these probably were legitimate emergencies. Water heaters do break, cars do need repairs, utilities do get shut off if you don't pay them. But I started noticing a pattern. The emergencies always seemed to happen right after they'd spent money on something unnecessary. New furniture would show up at their house, then 2 weeks later, they'd need help with the mortgage. Dad would take a weekend trip to visit his brother, then suddenly there wasn't money for groceries. They weren't having emergencies, they were having consequences, and I was their safety net. Kyle's requests were more frequent and more blatant than our parents'. He needed money for rent almost every month, claiming his paychecks weren't quite covering it. He needed money for groceries because he'd miscalculated his budget. He needed money for car insurance because he'd forgotten when it was due. He needed money for these job training courses that were supposedly going to help him get a better position. Courses he'd sign up for, pay half the fee, then never complete. He needed tools for a new job, tools that would sit unused in his apartment until he quit that job 3 months later. Each time, without fail, he'd promise to pay me back. Each time, he'd disappear when I mentioned repayment, suddenly becoming impossible to reach until enough time had passed that bringing it up again would make me look petty. The guilt trips when I hesitated got more intense over time. If I took more than a day to respond to a request, I'd get follow-up messages about how urgent it was, how they'd already told the landlord or utility company or mechanic that payment was coming. If I asked questions about why they needed the money or what happened to their paycheck, I'd get defensive responses about how I clearly didn't trust them and how families shouldn't interrogate each other. If I said no or even suggested maybe they should look for cheaper alternatives, I'd get long speeches about how success had changed me and I'd forgotten what it was like to struggle. The real turning point came about 18 months after I sold the app. Kyle called me on a Tuesday afternoon, which was already suspicious because he usually only contacted me when he wanted something. Said he had an amazing business opportunity. A friend was starting a restaurant and needed investors. If I could loan him $15,000, he'd give me 20% of his share, guaranteed return within a year. I'd learned enough about business to know that guaranteed returns don't exist and that restaurant investments are risky even for experienced entrepreneurs. But mostly, I knew Kyle had never successfully managed money in his entire life. I told him no, explained that I didn't have that kind of liquid cash available for investments right now, which was true. Most of my money was tied up in the business or invested. But even if I did, I wouldn't invest in a restaurant with no business plan, no market research, and no track record. He got defensive immediately, said I thought I was better than him now that I had money, said I was selfish for not helping family chase their dreams, said I'd changed, become cold, forgot where I came from. The conversation ended with him hanging up on me. 2 days later, Mom called. Had I really refused to help Kyle with his business opportunity? Did I not want to see him succeed? Why was I being so difficult when I clearly had money to spare? That's when I realized they'd all been talking about me, coordinating their approach. Mom was doing the emotional manipulation while Kyle played the victim. I tried explaining my reasoning again. Mom wasn't interested in logic. She just kept circling back to the fact that Kyle needed help, and I had the means to provide it. When I held firm, she said something I'll never forget. We sacrificed so much to raise you boys. The least you could do is help your brother when he's trying to better himself. Sacrificed. like I owed them some kind of debt for doing the bare minimum of parenting. That conversation ended poorly too. I didn't yell or get dramatic, just calmly explained that I wasn't giving Kyle money for a restaurant investment Mom said I'd changed, and not in a good way. The next few months were tense. Kyle stopped calling entirely. My parents would call occasionally, usually about something neutral, but there was always this underlying tension. They'd mention how Kyle was struggling, how he was working so hard, how he just needed a break. The subtext was clear. You could be that break, but you're choosing not to be my girlfriend at the time, Jennifer. Watched all this unfold with increasing frustration. She'd grown up in a similar environment, working-class family, older sibling who became successful, younger siblings who expected handouts. She'd set boundaries early and dealt with years of being called selfish before her family finally accepted it. They're never going to stop asking, she told me one night. Every time you give them money, you're teaching them that asking works. You're training them to see you as a solution to their problems instead of supporting themselves. She was right, but it's hard to accept that about your own family. Things escalated during Christmas that year. The whole family gathered at my parents' house, the same house I'd grown up in. Now showing its age with peeling paint and outdated fixtures, Kyle brought his girlfriend Stephanie. My parents cooked a nice meal, and for a while it felt almost normal, until Kyle announced his big news. He'd gone ahead and invested in the restaurant himself, found other investors who believed in him, unlike his own brother. The place was opening in 2 months, and he was going to be a part owner. He made a point of thanking everyone who'd supported him, looking directly at me when he mentioned people who didn't. Mom and Dad congratulated him enthusiastically. I sat there feeling like the villain in a story I didn't write. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside, asked if I'd reconsider helping Kyle now that the restaurant was actually happening. He'd already invested his own money and could use additional capital for equipment and marketing. Family should support family, especially during important ventures. I asked how much Kyle had invested. Dad got vague. Whatever he could afford. Pressed for a number and found out Kyle had put in $2,500 total, money he'd borrowed from our parents. So Kyle invested borrowed money, was now asking me for more money, and everyone was treating him like a hero while I was the selfish one, for not throwing cash at what would obviously be a disaster. I declined again. Dad looked disappointed but not surprised. He'd already written the story where I was the bad guy. The restaurant opened in February. I wasn't invited to the opening night, which honestly was fine. Jennifer and I were building a life together, my business was growing, and I was starting to accept that my family and I just had fundamentally different views about money and responsibility. The restaurant lasted 4 months. Kyle had partnered with 2 friends who had no restaurant experience either. They'd chosen a location with high rent and low foot traffic, created a menu that was too ambitious for their skill level, and priced everything based on their costs rather than what the market would bear. Classic mistakes that anyone with basic business knowledge could have predicted. By June, they were done. Closed up shop, lost all their investors' money, and Kyle was back to square one. Except now he owed our parents $2,500 plus whatever credit card debt he'd racked up during the restaurant phase. I found out through Mom, who called to tell me the news and ask if I could help Kyle with his debt. He was really struggling. The restaurant failure had been devastating, and he needed support during this difficult time. The audacity was almost impressive. I told Mom no. Explained that I'd warned Kyle this would happen, that restaurant investments are risky, and that I wasn't going to bail him out of consequences he'd created for himself. She got quiet, then said she was disappointed in the person I'd become. That hurt more than I expected it to. Kyle sent me a long text message that night, called me every name short of cursing, said I'd sabotaged his dream by not investing, claimed the restaurant would have succeeded if I'd provided proper funding, accused me of being jealous of his ambition. The mental gymnastics were Olympic level. His failure was my fault because I didn't give him money. I didn't owe him for a business plan that was doomed from the start. I didn't respond. Just screenshotted the message and saved it. Over the next few months, the requests kept coming, but the tone changed. Now, instead of asking for help, they were demanding it. Now, instead of promises to pay me back, there were guilt trips about family loyalty. Now, instead of emergencies, there were expectations. Mom needed help with property taxes. $1,800 Dad's car died, and he needed a down payment on a replacement, $3,000. Kyle needed first and last month's rent for a new apartment, $2,400. Each request came with an implicit threat, refuse and you're proving you don't care about family. I started tracking everything in a spreadsheet, every request, every amount, every promise of repayment, every time they'd said just this once, or We wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. The numbers were staggering. In the 2 years since I'd told them about the app sale, I'd given them approximately $31,000. Not loaned, given. Because none of it had ever been paid back, and none of it ever would be. Kyle alone had received about $12,000 in direct handouts plus the car money. He'd never thanked me, never acknowledged it as anything other than what I owed him for being his brother. That's when I made my decision. Jennifer and I had gotten engaged. We were planning a small wedding, looking at houses, building our future together. She'd been patient with my family drama, but she'd also been clear. We weren't starting our marriage with my family treating me like an ATM. You need to set boundaries, she said. Real ones. Not maybe next time or I'll think about it, but actual hard boundaries with consequences. She was right. I'd been avoiding the confrontation because I didn't want to accept what it would mean, that choosing myself meant losing my family. But they'd already made their choice. They saw me as a resource, not a son or brother. I drafted a message to the family group chat. Simple, clear, no room for misinterpretation. I won't be providing any more financial assistance to anyone in the family I've helped when I could, but it's become unsustainable. I need to focus on my own financial future. I hope you understand. Sent it on a Sunday evening. The responses came fast. Kyle. Wow. So that's it? You're just cutting us off? Nice brother you turned out to be. Mom. I don't understand why you're doing this. We're family. Family helps each other. Dad. This seems extreme. Can we talk about this? I didn't respond immediately. Let them sit with it overnight. Wanted to see how they'd react without me there to defend myself or explain my reasoning. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and about 30 text messages. The family group chat had exploded into a full-scale intervention where everyone except me was discussing what was wrong with me. Kyle had written an essay about how I'd always thought I was better than them, how money had changed me, how I'd forgotten my roots. Mom was playing the hurt parent, talking about sacrifices they'd made, and how she never expected one of her sons to abandon the family. Dad was trying to be the mediator, but was clearly taking their side. The most revealing messages came from Kyle's girlfriend Stephanie, who apparently felt comfortable jumping into the family chat to share her opinions. She'd written multiple paragraphs about how families should support each other unconditionally, how my business success meant I had an obligation to help relatives in need, and how my refusal to fund Kyle's dreams was holding him back from his potential. The entitlement was breathtaking. This woman I'd met 3 times thought she had the right to lecture me about family obligations, while dating a guy who'd never held a job for more than 6 months. I let them vent for a full day. Didn't respond, didn't defend myself, just let them reveal exactly who they were when they thought I wasn't watching. Then I responded once, in the group chat, with a single message. I've given this family over $30,000 in the past 2 years. None of it was paid back despite promises. None of it was appreciated beyond the immediate moment. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just stopping a pattern that was never going to end. If you can't respect that boundary, then we don't have much else to discuss. The silence that followed was almost worse than the explosion. For about 6 hours, nobody responded. Then Mom called. She was crying, which was clearly meant to make me feel guilty. Said she couldn't believe I was throwing money in their faces, that gifts given freely shouldn't be tracked like debts, that family doesn't keep score. I let her finish, then asked a simple question. If I'd never told you about selling the app, would you be this upset about me not giving you money I don't have? She didn't have an answer for that. The conversation ended with her saying she needed time to process everything. I told her that was fine, and that I loved her, but my decision was final. Kyle's response was more aggressive. He called me later that night, tried to argue that I owed them for raising me, that successful people have a responsibility to lift up their families, that I was being selfish and cruel. When I pointed out that he'd never paid back a single dollar of the money I'd given him, he said that was different. Those were gifts, not loans. When I mentioned the $3,000 he'd specifically promised to pay back, he said I was being petty about money I didn't even need. You have plenty, he said. Why does it matter if I pay you back? That sentence crystallized everything. In Kyle's mind, my money was his money whenever he needed it, but his obligations were negotiable depending on his convenience. I told him we were done talking and hung up. The next few weeks were weird. No calls from anyone except Dad, who tried twice to convince me to reconsider. He wasn't aggressive about it, just disappointed Saeed. He understood my frustration, but thought I was overreacting, that family should be able to work through disagreements. I asked him how much money he'd given Kyle over the years. He got defensive, said that was different. Kyle was still figuring things out, needed more support, had been dealt a harder hand in life. What harder hand? I asked. We grew up in the same house, went to the same schools, had the same opportunities. The difference is I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college while Kyle quit after 1 semester. How is that me being lucky? Dad didn't have a good answer, just more excuses about how Kyle needed more help, how I should be understanding, how I'd always been more capable. That phrase again. More capable translation. You can handle it, so you should. Jennifer and I got married that fall. Small ceremony, close friends, none of my family invited. Not out of spite, but because I knew they'd either not show up or make it about their feelings instead of our day. Mom sent a card with a note about how sad she was to miss it, how she hoped I'd reconsider my decision to cut them off, how family should be present for important moments. The irony was lost on her. Kyle sent nothing. Dad sent a brief text congratulating me. That was it. My wedding day was perfect without them. No drama, no guilt trips, no emotional manipulation. Just people who genuinely cared about us celebrating our relationship. 6 months into my marriage, I got a Facebook message from Kyle's girlfriend, Stephanie. Long, rambling thing about how Kyle had been trying to turn his life around, how he'd gotten a steady job and was doing well, how he'd really grown as a person. Then the ask, he needed $5,000 for career training certification that would qualify him for a promotion. The audacity of this woman messaging me on Kyle's behalf after everything that had happened was stunning. I didn't even respond. Just blocked her. 2 weeks later, Kyle created a new Facebook account to message me directly. The training was legitimate. He was really changing this time. He just needed one more chance to prove himself. If I gave him this money, he'd pay me back everything he owed. The car money, the restaurant money, all of it. I finally responded, "No, I meant what I said about boundaries, stop asking." His reply was immediate and vicious. More accusations about being selfish, about thinking I was better than my family, about how success had ruined me as a person. He hoped I was happy with my perfect life while the rest of them struggled. I blocked that account too. Life moved on. Jennifer and I bought a house. My consulting business grew. We talked about starting a family. I built a life that wasn't defined by guilt or obligation or managing other people's crises. About a year after the wedding, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Ignored it. They called back immediately. Ignored again. Then a voicemail. It was Mom. She was calling from a friend's phone because I'd blocked her number. Dad had been diagnosed with a serious health condition. She didn't specify what, and they needed help with medical bills. Insurance wasn't covering everything, and they'd already depleted their savings. Could I please call her back? The manipulation was transparent. Use Dad's health to get me to break my boundaries. And maybe Dad really was sick. I had no way to verify. But the pattern was clear. Crisis leads to request for money, leads to guilt if I refuse. I didn't call back. 3 days later, Dad called me from his own phone. He sounded tired but not desperate. Confirmed he'd been diagnosed with diabetes and high blood pressure. Serious but manageable with medication and lifestyle changes. Medical bills were higher than expected, but they were working with the hospital on a payment plan. Then he got to the real point. Could I help them with about $4,000 for medical expenses? I asked if it was genuinely an emergency or if they'd survive without my money. He admitted they'd survive, but it would be tight for a while. I told him I couldn't help, that my boundary still stood. He was quiet for a moment, then said he understood and that he loved me regardless. That conversation was the most honest we'd been in years. Mom, however, wasn't done. She got my new number from somewhere, probably my aunt, and left me a voicemail that was dripping with venom disguised as hurt. Called me heartless for refusing to help when my father was sick. Said she didn't recognize the person I'd become. Said she was ashamed to call me her son. That message should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it just confirmed that I'd made the right decision. Kyle tried one more time about 6 months ago. Showed up at my office unannounced. Somehow found out where I worked. My assistant called me to say I had a visitor, and when I came out to reception, there he was. He looked rough, thinner, tired, wearing clothes that had seen better days. For a moment, I almost felt bad for him. Then he opened his mouth, started with an apology that felt rehearsed. He'd been immature, hadn't appreciated what I'd done for him, understood why I'd set boundaries. He was different now, really making changes. Had a stable job for 8 months. Wanted to rebuild our relationship. I was actually considering giving him a chance until he got to his real agenda. He needed a co-signer for an apartment lease. His credit was terrible from the restaurant debts, but with my signature he could get a nice place. Wouldn't cost me anything unless he defaulted, and he definitely wouldn't default this time. The whole apology had been a setup to ask for another favor. I told him to leave. He tried arguing, said I was being unreasonable. That co-signing wasn't even giving him money I called building security. He left cursing my name loud enough for the whole floor to hear. That was the last direct contact I've had with any of them. My aunt, mom's sister, calls occasionally to give me updates I don't ask for. Kyle's been through 2 more jobs. My parents are managing their bills, but it's tight. Everyone still talks about me like I'm the villain who abandoned the family when they needed me most. The story they tell is that I got rich and forgot where I came from, that I turned my back on the people who raised me, that I value money more than family. Jennifer and I just found out we're having a baby. When I told my aunt, she asked if this meant I'd reconcile with my parents so they could meet their grandchild. The assumption that I'd use my kid as leverage to rebuild a toxic relationship was stunning. I told her no. My child will know their grandparents if and when my parents can respect boundaries. Until then, we're building our own family, one based on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.